Most people assume Onan's death was divine punishment for an isolated sexual act. The truth is something else entirely. What actually happened involved economic betrayal, stolen inheritance, and the silent murder of a woman's future. This is the story you were never told. Put it in perspective. Canaan, approximately 1900 years before Christ. A suffocating plain where the wind carries dust mixed with the smell of animals and human sweat. Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, lives far from his father's house. He had distanced himself from his brothers after an episode he would carry for the rest of his life. The sale of Joseph, the youngest brother, for 20 pieces of silver to Ishmaelite merchants heading to Egypt. Judah was the one who proposed the sale, and now, living among Canaanites in the region of Adullam, he tries to build a new life, far from a heavy conscience that refuses to fade. Consider the situation. Judah marries the daughter of a man named Shua, a Canaanite. With her, he has 3 sons. The firstborn, Onan the second, Shelah the youngest. The family prospers among the low hills of Judea. The flocks grow. Judah's name becomes known among the merchants of the region. But there is a structural detail that matters for everything that follows. In the Semitic cultures of that period, paternal inheritance was divided among sons according to an inflexible rule. The firstborn received double, 2 portions. The others received 1 portion each. This was the practice among Hebrews, Canaanites, Amorites, and most peoples of the Fertile Crescent. That rule explains half of what is about to happen. Grew up differently. The texts do not detail his acts, but Genesis 38 verse 7 records it plainly. He was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Just that. No lengthy judgment, no warning, no specifics of the crime. For Judah it was devastating, not only because he had lost a son while still young, because of the lineage, because of the name, because of the clan's future. Consider the stakes. In Mesopotamia and throughout the ancient Near East, losing the firstborn without descendants meant losing 2 things simultaneously. The dead man's name was erased from social memory, and the lands designated for him entered into dispute among surviving relatives. For this reason, there existed an institution that centuries later would be codified in Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 5 through 10. Historians call it levirate marriage, from the Latin levir, meaning brother-in-law. The rule worked as follows. If a married man died without children, his brother had a legal and religious obligation to take the widow as his wife and father a child with her. That child would not belong biologically to his natural father. He would belong, in name and in inheritance, to the dead brother. He would carry the dead man's name. He would receive the dead man's inheritance. He would continue the dead man's lineage. It was an act of family loyalty taken to its extreme. And this is where the story descends into the basement of human motivation. Onan knew exactly what fulfilling that obligation meant. He also knew exactly what refusing it meant. If he fathered a child with Tamar in Er's name, that child would inherit the double portion designated for the firstborn. Onan, who was now technically the oldest living son, would lose his primacy. The double share would go to the child he himself produced, but who would not be considered his. Calculate the financial impact. Flocks of hundreds of head. Pastures equivalent to several Olympic stadiums combined. Slaves, accumulated goods, commercial contracts with Adullamite merchants. All of this, instead of concentrating in Onan's hands as the new firstborn, would be divided. Worse, he would generate with his own body an heir who would benefit the memory of a dead brother while he himself watched his own patrimony diminish. Onan then made a cold choice. He would agree to marry Tamar publicly. He would maintain the appearance of obligation before the community, but he would refuse to do what would give the act its true purpose. Genesis 38 verse 9 is surgical in its description. Whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the seed on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. It was not an isolated act. It was a pattern, repeated, calculated. Each time he approached Tamar, he executed the same silent betrayal. Think about the quiet cruelty of that. Tamar had no voice to protest publicly. She had no autonomy to demand. She was a woman in a society where her social function was bound to motherhood. Without a child from the dead brother, she would remain a permanent widow, without the right to marry anyone else, trapped indefinitely in Judah's family, seen as barren or cursed by neighbors who knew nothing of what went on inside that house. Onan turned obligation into an instrument of exploitation. He used Tamar's body for his own pleasure. He denied her the child that was her legal right. He stole her future while preserving his own patrimony. And he did all of it under the disguise of apparent compliance with the law. The sacred text records the divine reaction directly. What he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Silence. There is no dialogue, no warning, no second chance described, only the sentence and its execution. Follow Tamar's position within the broader historical context. The Hittite legal codes, dated to approximately 1600 years before Christ, devote entire paragraphs to the widow. The Middle Assyrian laws of the second millennium before Christ are even more detailed. A widow without children had no right to inherit land. She could not administer her dead husband's estate. She depended entirely on his family for survival. If his family rejected her, she returned to her father's house in a condition inferior to that of an unmarried daughter, marked by permanent social suspicion. Tamar lived in that zone of uncertainty for the entire duration of her marriage to Onan. She was not a full widow. She was not a fertile wife. She was a living legal instrument, waiting to produce the heir her husband refused to allow. Measure the psychological toll. Month after month, she realized she was not becoming pregnant. In a society where infertility was considered shame or curse, the stigma would fall on her, not on Onan. Neighbors would look at her as a cursed woman who had killed one husband and now could not give children to the second. The internal truth remained hidden within the walls of the house. Onan knew this. He used that silence. Each encounter was a double violation. Violation of the body because the act lacked its agreed purpose. Violation of reputation because the visible outcome fell on Tamar while the financial calculation remained invisible to the community. The months accumulated, possibly a year, possibly two. The text does not specify, and it is because of this complete structure that the divine sentence fell on Onan with the precision that it did. Onan's death, unlike Er's death, comes with an explicitly recorded motive. The Semitic construction of the verse is surgical. It was not an isolated physical act. It was what he did, meaning a continuous practice. The original Hebrew uses a verb form indicating habitual, patterned, deliberate action. Onan did not commit a single error. He established a system. Ancient Jewish commentators centuries later would debate intensely what exactly had been punished. The Talmud and the Midrashim discuss whether it was the wasting of the seed, whether it was the refusal of levirate law, whether it was the exploitation of Tamar, whether it was all of them combined. The traditional Christian reading, for its part, has emphasized different aspects throughout history. But the original text, read in its Semitic structure, points to something broader. The perversion of an institution of family protection transformed into a mechanism of private greed. Onan was punished for what he did, for what he refused to do, and for the way he combined the two. Now, 2 sons dead. Judah had widowed Tamar a second time without her having any children. And there, in the devastated heart of a father who had already lost 2 heirs in a short span of time, A thought arose that would change his daughter-in-law's destiny. What if she is the cause? What if there is something in her that kills my sons? Observe Judah's calculation. Sheila remained, the youngest, still young, according to the text. Judah said to Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until Shelah, my son, is grown." And he sent her away. But the text makes a devastating observation in the same verse. For he feared that he would die, like his brothers. Judah lied. He had no intention of giving Shelah to Tamar. He was simply waiting for her to give up, perhaps return to her father's house permanently, and disappear from the family landscape. Tamar was sent into social limbo. She was not a wife. She was not a single woman. She could not marry. She could not become pregnant. She could not inherit. She could not start over. Years pass. The text does not specify how many, but the contextual evidence suggests somewhere between 5 and 10. Shelah grows up. He becomes a man, and nothing happens. Tamar remains in her father's house, wearing widow's garments, socially marked, with no visible future. And here the second movement of this narrative opens. Tamar was not a passive figure. Later midrashim and archaeological studies of women's positions in the ancient Levant show that widows in extreme situations eventually took drastic actions to secure a place in the lineage. And Tamar took hers. She learned that Judah was in mourning for the death of his own wife, Shua's daughter. She learned that he was going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. She learned which road he would travel. She removed her widow's garments. She covered herself with a veil, in the manner that some women connected to Canaanite cults wore along the roads. She sat at the entrance of Enaim, on the way. Think about the brutal courage of that. If discovered, she would be burned alive. The penalty was literal. It was the standard Canaanite punishment for women from established families accused of prostitution. Tamar knew the risk. She accepted the risk, because the limbo in which she lived was equivalent to a slower death, without a name, without a future, without a voice. Judah passed by. He saw. He did not recognize her. He drew near. The text, in Genesis 38, verse 16, records the conversation with a shocking economy of words. He proposes, she negotiates, he offers a young goat from the flock. She demands a pledge until the goat arrives. He hands over 3 personal objects: the signet ring, the cord, and the staff. Those 3 objects were not decorative accessories. The signet was the legal identity of a free man in the ancient Near East. It sealed documents. It guaranteed contracts. It was the equivalent of an identity card combined with an official signature. The cord held the signet around the neck, a visible marker of social standing. The staff bore unique carvings that identified its bearer from several paces away. Tamar demanded, in essence, Judah's public identity as collateral. He handed it over. Tamar became pregnant in that first encounter. She returned home. She removed the veil. She put her widow's garments back on. She returned to apparent limbo. Judah, weeks later, sent the promised goat through his friend Hira the Adullamite. Hira looked for the veiled woman. He did not find her. He asked the people of Enaim where the consecrated woman was who had customarily sat by the road. The people answered that no woman of that kind had ever been there. Hira returned and reported. Judah made a pragmatic decision. Better to lose the objects than to become known as the man who went looking for paid relations and was deceived. He said, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at." 3 months later, the news arrived. "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the whore, and moreover, she is with child." Judah's reaction was immediate and thunderous. "Bring her out and let her be burned." Think about the irony of that sentence. Judah, who had committed the act with Tamar believing she was a consecrated woman by the roadside, now orders her executed for having prostituted herself. The same sentence that would have destroyed them both had he known she was carrying his child. The difference was that in the society of that time, a man was not punished for the act with a professional woman. Only the woman was. But Tamar had kept the three objects. At the moment she was being led to execution, she sent the objects to her father-in-law with a precise message. "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child. Please identify whose these are, this signet and cord and staff." Silence. Judah recognized them instantly. They were his, unmistakable. And there, before Judah's household, the man who had lied about Shelah, who had condemned his daughter-in-law to execution, who had claimed for himself the right he denied her, did the only honest thing recorded in that entire portion of the narrative. He said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son, Shelah." The public confession was not small. In honor-based societies, publicly admitting you had wronged a woman considered socially inferior was a calculated humiliation. Judah assumed it. Tamar was spared. She carried the pregnancy to term. And here, the text of Genesis 38 pauses to describe a birth that seems, at first reading, a curious detail, but one that connects to everything that came before and everything that would come after. Tamar was carrying twins. During the birth, one of the boys put his hand out. The midwife tied a scarlet thread on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But the boy drew his hand back, and the other brother was born first. The one with the scarlet thread came out after. The biological firstborn was not the legal firstborn. The one who was born first received the name Perez, meaning breach or breaking through, in reference to the manner in which he broke out ahead of his brother. The second, with the scarlet thread, was called Zerah, meaning brightness. Think about the narrative echo. The entire story began with a struggle over birthright. Onan refused to father a firstborn for his dead brother because he himself wanted the double portion. And now, at the birth, two babies literally compete for primacy within the womb of the woman he had despised and tried to erase. The narrative theology of Genesis is among the densest in all of ancient literature. Every detail matters. Every repetition has structural function. But the greatest revelation was still to come. Perez, the son who broke through first, the son of the woman Judah tried to burn alive, the son conceived in a roadside encounter with a disguised widow. This Perez became the father of a lineage. Examine the records. The book of Ruth, in the 4th chapter, verses 18 through 22, traces the genealogy. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon, married to Rahab, the former prostitute of Jericho, fathered Boaz. Boaz, married to Ruth the Moabite, fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. David, the greatest king of Israel, the author of a great portion of the Psalms, the man after God's own heart. He came in direct line from the son Tamar, bore against all probability. From the son Onan, refused to father. And approximately 1,000 years after David, in a small village in Galilee, a carpenter named Joseph would discover that his betrothed was pregnant without him having touched her. Matthew, recording this carpenter's genealogy in the 1st chapter of his gospel, does something extraordinary. He lists only 4 women among the dozens of named men. Tamar is the first of them, the same Tamar that Onan despised, the same Tamar that Judah tried to burn, the same Tamar who sat by the road at Enaim with a veil over her face and demanded the signet ring, the cord, and the staff. Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. Judah, the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar. The line that leads to the Messiah of the New Testament passes through the son Onan refused to father. Return now to the center of the mechanism. Onan believed he was protecting his patrimony, that he was preserving his position. that he was controlling the destiny of the inheritance through a cold calculation no one would understand. He believed his desire to retain the double portion was more important than the name of a dead brother and the future of a woman without a voice. He did not see what he was destroying. Shelah, the youngest brother whom Judah concealed out of fear, never again appears as a protagonist. He receives very few lines in the rest of Genesis. He disappears from the main story. The legitimate sons of Judah with Shua's daughter dissolve into secondary genealogies. But Perez, the son generated outside of any plan, outside of any calculation, outside of any initial obedience to the law, raises a lineage. His descendants cross the desert, they conquer Canaan. They found the dominant tribe. They produced judges, kings, prophets. The line reaches Bethlehem. It crosses the Babylonian exile. It survives Persian domination. It endures the Hellenistic age. And it arrives centuries after that silent encounter at Enaim, at a stable where the child the Gospels call Son of David, Son of Abraham, is born. Onan died to preserve an inheritance that was never truly his. And precisely because he died, the inheritance he could never have imagined passed through other hands. Ancient rabbinic texts called Tamar the mother of the messianic lineage. The earliest Christian writings, upon seeing her name in Matthew's genealogy, recognized the paradox. The woman her father-in-law considered a prostitute, the woman Onan despised, the woman condemned to the fire, is the same woman whose blood runs in the veins of the central figure of the New Testament. The documentary revelation is stark. What appeared to be scandal was historical mechanism. What appeared to be condemnation was preservation. What appeared to be the end of a lineage was its true beginning. Onan's death, read in isolation, seems disproportionate. Read across the full arc. It reveals a structure. When a man uses another person's body as an instrument, lies about his intentions, and perverts an institution of family protection into a tool of silent exploitation, the narrative justice of Genesis does not negotiate. The sentence comes quickly, briefly, definitively. But the story does not end there. It ends centuries later in the name of a silenced woman who refused to disappear. It ends in the son who should never have been born. It ends in a lineage that carries from beginning to end the mark of the one who was more righteous than she appeared. The story of Onan is not about isolated waste. It is about what happens when someone tries to erase another person's future in order to preserve their own, and about the future that, against all human logic, survives regardless.